Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. Today I want to get started with doing some ballasting here on the modules. There isn't a lot that I can do, unfortunately, because I still have a number of things on order that are back ordered because, due to the COVID shutdowns in various areas, manufacturers just can't produce enough product to fill demand. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we get started, I want to ask you to take a second to subscribe. Click on the subscribe box, and when that comes up, click on the little bell right next to it and click all. One thing I wanted to go back and talk about, and a couple of people have asked me about this, is, in places like this one right here, you can see where the tape was that I covered these areas when I did my spray painting. And one thing you can do is get yourself one of these or some of these little micro brushes, and then you can take these and literally just with a little bit of paint apply it over these areas that were left clean. And that way you're covering up after what you've done. Okay, so I've already done most of these, but you can get that little micro brush down in there. And I get these micro brushes, I got a bunch of them from China on eBay, and just go in there and look under makeup. And these are micro brushes that are used for applying makeup. So you can get these very inexpensively compared to what you'll pay for them in a hobby shop. So you can just get that nice and tidied up. And once it dries, you won't even see it. Okay, so that's how I go about touching up the sides of the rails in places that did not get touched with paint because I had the tape over them, or they were maybe just a little bit thin in places when you applied the paint to it. We'll start today with the turnout, and then I'll move on out as we finish this one. But I want to get that done first, okay? The thing about turnouts that you have to be careful about is there's a lot of areas in here at the points, that are moving. And they are in contact with the ties or the sleepers, okay? And because of that, you have to be careful about getting glue in between the point rails and the stock rails, because they can get glued together. The mechanism in here can get glued up and gummed up. You can get glue underneath of the rails between them and the tops of the sleepers here. So you can get all of this stuff stuck together if you're not careful. Now, I'll show you how I go about doing that, because there's two approaches. One thing you can do is take some light oil in one of these dispensers like you get at your hobby shop, and just apply that in these locations, under the rails, here, here, and here, and between the point rails and the stock rails, and down in here. And that will allow you to apply your glue without any concern that they're going to glue is going to get wicked in there and glue them shut and create a problem for you. So that's one thing you can do. Now, after you've completed your ballasting and applied all your glue and it's had a good chance to dry, then you can go back, and it should move just like that without any problems if you've used the oil. But you need to go back with a toothbrush like this one here, and take some alcohol and just go in there between all the parts where you've applied that oil, and get that oil out of there. Because otherwise it's going to result in the buildup of that black grunge that is a mixture of oil and dirt and everything else that accumulates in your layout. And you want to prevent that. Plus, you don't want it to get on your wheels, because then you'll start to lose traction. So it's just a simple matter to go back and clean any oil out. Now, if the approach I go about with is I'm very, very careful about how I apply and where I apply my ballast cement. And because of that, I've never had any problems with these parts sticking together. So I'll show you how I go about doing that here in a minute. In my previous video, I showed you this product here. It's a ballast applicator. You know, it just sits on the top of it's got these slots in it to sit on the rails. And you can just put that on top of those rails and put your ballast in there, open it up and move along, and it will apply a layer of ballast. But in an area like this, where you've got a bunch of turnouts, that's just not going to work. You have to go back and resort to the good old-fashioned spoon, okay? And typically, this is what I use in yards and areas like that. This I can use out on the main line and long stretches of track, and it does a fairly good job. So let's go ahead and get started with applying some ballast in here. So in these areas around the turnout, you want to apply it fairly sparsely, thinly, and then working out, you can start adding it in. Okay. And also add it into your ties here. And if you get areas like this where you get a bunch of it, particularly if it gets in here, you can just clean that up right away and it'll be fine, okay? Now, in some areas, I like to spread this out using a fan-type brush because it's a little bit more delicate and it will get it down into the areas between the ties. Okay. And then you can just pat it down so that it will conform to the slope. Okay, so I'm trying to keep the ballast below the top of the ties so that when I apply the glue, it's not going to be wicked up in there. Now, one thing you can do, and I showed in the video, is you can come in here and on the side of the ballast, you can apply a layer of your glue, okay? And you might want to dilute that just a little bit with water to keep it drying too fast. And that way, and this works very well on sloped areas in general, is if you apply a little bit of glue, it will stick to the sides of the slope quite well. In this case, though, I'm just going to allow it to build up, okay? So let's bring this fan brush along, right along the top of the ties here, and that gets them cleaned out. And try to get this area, the web of the rail, the side of the rail here, cleaned out. Because in real life, you don't see gravel or ballast stuck to the sides of the rails. And it is a very slow process. I mean, it took me weeks to do the main yard at Monroe on the Piedmont Southern because, you know, there's just a lot of turnouts in that yard. And they take a lot of work to get it done right. Okay, so I'm just bringing this on down here, all the way down. We'll bring it down past the magnet and spread a little bit on the inside where it's going to meet the main line. I don't want to do too much here because I've still got, like I said, some things that need to be added before I can complete the ballasting all the way. Sometimes it's better to use a firmer brush to move a lot of ballast out. Now I'll go back to the light brush here. And this one is really good for getting ballast off the top of the ties and the sides of the rails. So you can just work it on down. And one of the reasons I don't really like dumping a bunch of ballast on is that it becomes a real problem in trying to get it down below the level of the ties. And you end up with a bunch up on top here. Now another thing you can do is run your thumb or finger down through here like this, and that can distribute a lot fairly quickly, as you can see. And then you can come along and do the sides. Also, if you take the end of your paintbrush and just tap a bit, the vibrations will knock a lot of those small bits off of the sides of the rails. You want to do it lightly in both directions so that you don't end up with material ballast built up on one edge of the ties. Okay, that area is pretty well ballasted. Now, what I want to do is, as I've told you in the past and with my scenery work, I use isopropyl alcohol as a wetting agent. So you just want to bring that in here and let it spread out on its own. And the reason I like using isopropyl alcohol as opposed to wet water is because it dries so much faster. It's going to evaporate quite quickly. And in 24 hours, I'll be able to come back and work on this some more if I need to. Whereas if I were using wet water and it's a humid time of the year, it can take several days for it to dry out completely. For those of you that don't remember, wet water is just regular old tap water with a few drops of liquid detergent or soap added to it. And that breaks the water film and allows the water to flow down into the ballast or your scenery. And I'm going to stop right here on this and go back when we get ready to apply the glue. But it allows you to wet all of this ballast, all the ballast, and then when you apply the ballast cement, it will flow right into it. Now another thing you can do, you can see here, you can apply this at the base of the slope, and it will wick up into the ballast. But it's important that you get this well wetted so that when you apply your ballast cement, it infiltrates all of the ballast. Otherwise, you can end up with just a layer of ballast on the top that is glued together. And the first time you poke it accidentally, or someone pokes it accidentally, it will break through and you will have a bunch of loose ballast come flowing out. And you'll see that on a lot of model railroads where people have had that situation. Okay, so we've got the alcohol down. Okay, and this is that Mod Podge, but you can use white PVA glue, whatever. It's about the same thing. Mod Podge has a few other ingredients in it that are not in standard PVA, which is why it's a little bit more expensive. And as I said, these come in gloss and matte versions. You don't want gloss because you don't want your ballast gleaming in the light. Okay, and then I'm just going to come back through here, and I'm going to apply this out here on the outside and let it wick into the ballast between the rails. And that way we can limit the amount and potential for the glue, for the ballast cement, to flow up in there and glue everything together. Now, as far as this ballast cement, I diluted about 1:1 with water. you might find that you need to use 2 parts water to 1 part of your ballast cement, particularly in cases where you might be spraying it on using a spray bottle. To get it to go through and not clog, you're probably going to have to dilute it quite a bit. And that should do the job for you. I'm going to work in here so that I can get this done. I'm staying away from that area between the rails down there at the points themselves. I need to add a little bit more alcohol right here at the bottom of this slope on the inside to get it to wick up into there. There we go. I get this area right here as well. Okay, now we can go ahead and finish doing that area. Okay, here we are. We've got this straight stretch. Let's go ahead and apply the alcohol. And like I said, this is just plain old 70% alcohol that you can get at the drugstore. And you can see you'll get a white wetting front moving down the slope and filling in all the voids in that ballast. So that's about all there is to it as far as this goes. And again, if you have used oil to protect your points here, make sure you come back after this is dried thoroughly and get that oil out of there, because you don't want it to create a problem for you. But you know, if you just work this, it will be free. Okay, you might get a little sticking at first, where maybe some does wick in between the point rail and the stock rail, or at the bottom here of these point rails. But if you just move it a couple of times, that will break the glue joint there. But as I said, generally, as long as you apply it from the outside and not apply it in the middle, it will go ahead and wick its way in, do its job, and it will not work its way up into these areas. So that's the safest way to go about doing turnouts as far as I'm concerned. Now I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then we'll come back and take a look at it tomorrow. And I'll show you some tricks for cleaning up places where ballast got stuck to the side of the rails. Like right in here, I can already see that there's some in there. Yep. So we'll come back and I'll show you how I go about cleaning that up. You'll also find that you'll end up with a little bit of ballast down in here on your frogs and the like. And we'll clean those out, and that should be it as far as getting started with the ballasting. Well, it's been almost 24 hours, and as you can see, everything is dried nice and solid. So let's take a look and see how it turned out. Okay, the points are moving freely, no problem at all. So nothing got glued down. But you can see that we do have some pieces of ballast attached to the top of the ties and the sides of the rails. Now, the first thing that you can do is take a nice stiff brush like this one here. And all this is a paintbrush that's been used so long that it's shortened itself. And you can usually take that and anything that is loosely attached to the sides of the rails and the ties, you can usually just brush it right off of there. And that'll clean it up real nice. Now, occasionally you're going to find stuff that is pretty well stuck on. And in those cases, you can take a stiff toothbrush, and that will usually bring any of the more resistant pieces off. And that'll give you a nice clean look to the sides of your rails and the top of your ties. Occasionally you'll run into pieces of ballast that are, glued on a little tighter, particularly in areas like around the frog here and these guides. And with those, what I use is my brass scratch brush. And I've shown you this before. You can get these brushes with fiberglass tips. This is brass, and you can get them with steel. Now the fiberglass I don't use because it invariably breaks off and you end up with little pieces of fiberglass in your fingers. And that doesn't feel very good, let me tell you. The brass, it works fairly well. It's not as aggressive as the steel is. So you can take this and run that down through the groove here, and that will bring out the last bits of ballast that get stuck in places like this. Clears it out real well. Now also, you'll see here on the sides, it will very quickly clean up the web of the rail. Unfortunately, it will also take the paint off, so you have to be very careful about using this. It also works very well on the top of ties where you've got accumulations of ballast that have gotten glued down. But that's how you clean it out. Okay, there we go. Got that little guy cleaned up some. So you can just run this over here, and like I said, it's more aggressive. It will take the paint off, but it cleans it up very nicely. There. Okay, so as you can see, it only takes a few minutes to clean up this work. And as I've said, everything moves very well. So as long as you do your gluing from outside and let the glue seep into the ballast here in the center, it's not going to gum up the works for you and glue your rails down, your point rails, and all of that. Okay, so that's how to go about cleaning up after you've finished your ballasting and applied your glue. And I still have a bit to do here. There's other places where I need to go over it with the toothbrush and get the loose stuff cleaned up. But it's a fairly easy task to come afterwards. And this is just the reality of it. You have to spend a certain amount of time, particularly with turnouts, in order to clean them up after you've done your ballasting. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. I hope I gave you some tips on ballasting that will help you with your work in the future. Also, go back and take a look at that series of videos that I did about 1.5 years ago on ballasting, and I'll include a link to them here. So have a good weekend, and we'll see you here on Monday with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.